So it's 19 August, and this is what happened on this day in Russian Cold War history. It expands beyond the Cold War, and we're going to go back as far as 1700. The Great Northern War. Russia declared war on Sweden. Now, there were multiple powers fighting with Sweden, but Russia joined into the fray here on 19 August. So fast forward up to 1934. Hitler won a plebiscite vote in Germany. That is, that he was made president with 90% of the electorate voting for him. He was already chancellor, now he's voted in as president, and he had all the powers that he needed to do all the bad that he was going to do. Remember, Hitler was voted in legally. 1936, Moscow show trials got underway. Now, there were waves of show trials, but these show trials were particularly virulent. The defendants had no possibility of being able to defend themselves. Then fast forward to 1960, there was another trial in Moscow where the defendant, his name was Francis Gary Powers. He was an American U-2 pilot. He was convicted of spying. Now, he was in a U-2 spy plane, and he was sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment, and he was in exchange for a Russian in 1962. Now, this is the big event. On 19 August, the Soviet coup attempt actually unfolds on Gorbachev. Now, I remember what happened here because I was in my car on the way to school with my parents, on the way to like my first day of college. They were dropping me off at school, and I remember listening to this on the radio, just stunned by it. Okay, so here's what happened. 1 a.m., Yaniev signs the documents forming the state emergency documents, powers. Now, the Russians do this a lot. They do something with the guise of legality. They do something illegal, but make it in a legal form and then say it's legal, like grabbing the 4 oblasts in Ukraine and saying, see, we signed this legal document because we could, or we had this vote, even if it was a sham vote, and now it's legal. Okay, 1 a.m., they signed these documents forming the state emergency documents. By 4 a.m., the KGB has surrounded Gorbachev's dacha. He's not going anywhere. They have him essentially locked down. At 6 a.m., there's an official broadcast of what was happening. Democratic reformers like Yeltsin were on this list of people to be arrested, and that's because the hardliners were the ones that were involved in the coup. Gorbachev hears the news on a BBC news station with a smuggled-in radio that the KGB did not take. Thousands of soldiers went in to secure Moscow. Potentially thousands of people were to be arrested. They had the handcuffs, they had the arrest forms. This was the plan. Yeltsin would have been arrested, but he had redirected his plane to a different airport, and then he goes and sets himself back up in the White House, the equivalent in Russia. Remember, Yeltsin is in charge in Russia, where Gorbachev is in charge in the Soviet Union. So there's these multiple levels. It's almost like a governor to a president, except for Russia's like the big one. Yeltsin, as president of Russia, condemns the coup. He urges the military not to take part in this, and he calls for a general strike. Most of the Soviet Union's oblasts were actually supportive of the coup. They thought this would be a good thing. There were only a handful of the oblasts that were supporting Yeltsin. Hundreds of thousands of demonstrators go out into the streets. They start constructing these barricades around Yeltsin's White House. At 4 p.m., Yaniev declares a state of emergency in Moscow. And that night, Gorbachev actually smuggled out a videotape of himself condemning the coup, and so that's going to be made public shortly. And Yeltsin has directed his people not to harass Soviet soldiers. The Soviets realized that their soldiers were defecting to the other side, so they were like trying to keep them in the barracks, but that left soldiers out to be able to enforce things, and so it was a big mess. So that was the coup in 1991 on this day, 19 August. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about the world we live in.